do that. So if someone just records that, that's fine. Do that. So Sarah says, I've been here 30 years, which either shows remarkable loyalty or an extreme lack of imagination and ambition. I'm not quite sure which it would be. Take your pick. So this is going to be a reflection back. As I say, it's an ex-augural. It's like an inaugural, only I'm leaving. So just saying ex-augural was the best term for it. And I'm going to take that opportunity to reflect back and look at things from 30 years ago, how they inform the present, and how we might respond to them in the future. So let's get myself going here. All right. So in this talk, I'm going to talk about place, values, make myself hostage to fortune on that one, teaching and learning, and also intersperse it with the self-indulgent ramblings of an old man. And hopefully that will stay within a reasonable time, such that if you wanted to raise some points, that's good. If you don't, that's also fine. If I go back, there's sort of three things that struck me when I joined in 91 around place, values and teaching and learning. The first one was place, that I joined York House. York House was a special place, and it defined really the work of the school and that part of the university. So I think that's important. One of the first things that happened when I joined the university was they organised for the school a one-day gender awareness event for all staff. Everyone had to go, 3-line whip, and male and female staff to explore the relationships we have with each other and the way we're working. And I thought, this is great. This is absolutely great. This is a place I want to work at, a place that will take these issues and deal with them head on. And it was, it was a difficult day, but I took so much out of that. I thought this is a progressive place. I like working here. And the other thing that happened that was quite striking was that there were meetings around teaching and learning. Hugh Miller organised these. Used to try and get a crowd by bringing in these homemade biscuits. And we get together and we talk about teaching and learning. And I'd worked in further education for a number of years before that. And if you want teaching intensive, then that you could work in further education. This is so much lighter in a sense. And I thought it was a delight. And I never had a meeting to have the sort of discussions we had here. And they were just brilliant. To be honest, the biscuits were, they were too weird, really. I mean, should have just brought hobnobs or something like that. But the meetings were just fantastic. And so that was my starting here. And that's the starting place for this talk, really. If I take you back, though, to 1991, it really was a very different time. It's hard to remember these things. Firstly, of significance, East Midlands Today hadn't started broadcasting. East Midlands Today started in 1991, and it's significant because it started broadcasting from York House, from the first 2 floors of York House, before the BBC moved to their building on Canal Street. They used to work out of the same building as us, and part of the university. Margaret Thatcher had only just been deposed. She was deposed around the same time I accepted the job here. So it was just coming out of that era. But Britain was a different place. The Troubles were still very evident. And during 1991, the IRA drove a transit van down Whitehall and mortar bombed Downing Street. I think that's what today they'd call a security breach. Spectacular. The big issue was launched as a response to unemployment, which reached 2.5 million in 1991. And if we hadn't suffered enough, Everything I Do It For You was #1 for 16 weeks through the summer. On brighter news, Forest made it to the cup final, though lost 2-1. They were robbed, really. Gascoigne should have been sent off in the first half. It was just shocking. But perhaps most remarkably, for when you think about the university, it was in August of 1991 that Tim Berners-Lee connected up the World Wide Web for the first time. I joined a university without an internet, and I cannot remember what that was like. So pervasive is this technology now. So that's that kind of massive jump between then and now. So the place, if I talk about place first, then the place I joined was York House. Or in this picture from Hugh Miller, thank you, Hugh, for giving me some pictures. Andy Sutton gave me some others. Ork House, in fact, the Y was optional. At some point, and I know I was there at some point when this was there, you used to have a petrol station at the bottom of the building. The health and safety around this time is just unbelievable when you just look back at that. So if you ever felt a bit stuffed up in the day, you just had to open the windows and soak up the diesel fumes. This was, and I joined Nottingham Polytechnic. It became a university the following year, 1992. This picture partly of Jill Arnold, colleague of us with us for many years, but particularly of the chair in the middle, which lived in York House and was always known as Terry Wogan's chair. And I always believed that it had been Terry Wogan's chair. Although when I come to think of it, I cannot think of the provenance of it, why it would possibly have been Terry Wogan's chair, but it was always thought to be that. York House had just so many dystopian images for York House. The car park always looked like a crime scene. And then we had the long corridors, which were very well populated, partly because the offices were so shabby, people lived in the corridors. And then you had fantastic views out onto Mansfield Road, but always in the comfort that you're never going to burn down because the whole place was built on asbestos. So, but it was strange, but I liked it. I liked being there. There was something really quite nice about Ork House. So many sort of great tales of the place that partly because I liked it, I think, because it was so shabby, senior management never came there. They were sort of too embarrassed to come and show anyone around or come and see us because it just was a shocking building. There was a time when even the windows were quite literally falling out because the frames were so rotten. But I liked working there. It was a friendly place. And as I say, there was a really strong corridor culture. It wasn't owned by the university. It was rented for the university. And so there were other people that were in the building. It had a caretaker. At one point, one of the caretakers was called Taff, and he had Taff's Caff, and he used to do a line of selling bacon sandwiches from his little kitchen down below. Or there was an occasion when he allowed us up onto the roof of York House to see an eclipse, not an ellipse. That would have been unimpressive. An eclipse, and so on. I mean, I could go up. When the building was first constructed, the company that built it couldn't get a building safety certificate, and so it was condemned, and hence was taken over by the Nottingham Co-op because of their links with Nottingham City Council, and hence became rented by the university, which was then still part of the council. So York House was just a fantastic place. So I say I really loved it. And oh yes, as you saw earlier, I mean, I found my staff card from those days as well. As you can see, very little change between now and then. However, as I said, other people lived in York House, and after the BBC moved out, social services still stayed there. The city council on the second floor had a large social services department. So Nottingham people actually came in to the place when the BBC were there even more. We were connected to the city in that way. So the city came in and we were part of that. So we had a particular place. And when we're talking about place, I think it's more than a building. It's about the place that the school and the university occupies within the city of Nottingham. And so that's what I want to sort of move into talking about now. You see, the way we see Nottingham, I think, is important here, and the place of the university in it. There's various narratives of Nottingham. The narrative that we see a lot of, particularly in the university brochures now, is Nottingham as a city of culture, a city of wealth, of excitement, of bars with eye-watering prices for glasses of beer, clubs, restaurants, everything. It's a buzzing town that seems alive and wealthy, and that's a narrative, particularly that the university gives us in all its brochures. But there's another narrative, and that is a narrative of deprivation. Please forgive the cliched image. I think that's Lenton Flats before they were knocked down. And Nottingham has serious issues there. When you come to all the deprivation indices, then we're up there in the top 5 cities in the country. We have really low uptake of people into further education and higher education. We have really poor health outcomes. We have a lot of long-term illness. We have low wages. With regards to health, currently we have one of the lowest uptakes of vaccination in the country, whereas the country's 80%. Nottingham's barely got above 50 in terms of first vaccination. That is the city. And you can have these two contrasting narratives. I think that's quite uncomfortable. I prefer a third narrative. And the third narrative, I think, combines the two, and it's Nottingham as a city of resistance and rebellion. When Professor Steve Reicher came and spoke to us a couple of years ago now, this is his topic, really, resistance and rebellion. And it was his view that there isn't a city in the UK with more incidents of rioting, civil disturbance, resistance and rebellion. We are the city of resistance and rebellion, I think, and the better for it. In 1861, people of Nottingham in the Reform riots burnt the castle down. We also have, of course, Robin Hood. For those of you who ever bring over international visitors here, you really have to hire the guy in this picture here. He's just a brilliant Robin Hood. When we had some international people here, they just loved everything he said. He's hilarious. And as an international symbol, people just lap up Robin Hood. And he's a symbol, this, of resistance and rebellion. And who can forget the cheese riots of 1766, when the mayor, where people were rioting over the price and distribution of cheese, and the mayor of Nottingham was injured through cheese. If you want to find out more about these things, then go to Five Leaves Bookshop, and they have details of this. During the Civil War, Nottingham was doggedly on the Republican side, and during the resistance to industrialisation, the centre of Ludditism was around here. It is that city of resistance and rebellion, and I think all the better for it. So where does the university sit in this? Well, the university sits as a picture like this, high and proud in the city. We are an international, world-leading, award-winning university. We are rebuilt, reborn, reimagined, rebooted, repainted. Couldn't think of any more re's. But I would say I think we're less engaged in the city with now something that the people of Nottingham walk past and go, "Oh, look, that's nice," rather than, well, this is part of us. Whereas I think I joined an organisation that was Nottingham's Polytechnic. I'm not sure we are Nottingham's University in that same way anymore. So what can we do about it? I mean, as you look forward, I think, and the school has taken this on, and in its response to University Reimagined, one of the game changers that the school has set to try and achieve is to, and I think this is a brilliant thing, to be collaborative, intentional and deliberate in interrupting Nottingham's cycles of disadvantage. And I know when Jason Pandy-Wood first came up with this, I thought, this isn't going anywhere. But when I thought about it, I thought, yeah, no, this is something you can do, and really we should be doing too. And stuff is already happening. It's not to say we don't reach out into Nottingham. I think people do. We've had research on going around food banks and social prescribing. Kevin Love and colleagues set up the Free University, which is now morphing into the University Community Academy. We have the Civic Exchange. We have Carrie Practor's work with the Centre for Children, Young People and Families, working on small steps, big changes. There's loads of stuff going on, but I just think that there is so much more that can be done there. Other parts of the university reach out really well. Confetti has great links into the creative parts of the city, as does the English department. So, you know, just my thought. So, moving on from my first worthy thought, I'm going to start talking about values, which, as I say, makes me a hostage to fortune, I think. But I think the whole climate in which we live and work, again, has changed dramatically in this 30 years. And if I take you back once more to 1991, if I show you some of the things that I think have changed or have happened in the following 30 years, you start to get a picture looking back of what was acceptable in 1991. So first issue, so the thing that I did when I first got here was the thing, can't find my words suddenly, is the session around gender awareness. And since then, there's various organisations in the country, UK Feminists, the Fawcett Society and others, that promote these things and do lots of work on it. And they would argue that perhaps we'd move forward a bit on this. The university now has its Athena Swan Award. Psychology department also has that. So you can see there is some movement, but there's also, there was a lot to be done. Also in the last 30 years, we've had a Disability Discrimination Act and an Equality Act. I think this has set the legal framework that has changed the way organisations, including Nottingham Trent, does business with its staff and its students. It was 1993 when Stephen Lawrence was murdered at a bus stop in South London, and following a botched police investigation, the Macpherson inquiry was set up. And the Macpherson inquiry coined the phrase, okay, it's unusual. Usually some sort of cold call offering me something or other. The Macpherson inquiry set up, and it came up with the notion of institutional racism and applied it to the Metropolitan Police. It's quite an interesting concept, institutional racism, and there are obviously issues with it, not least of which because institutions are actually made up of people, and so there's an individual responsibility for it as well as this collective thing. But I think it was helpful at the time, understanding that the racism was pervasive through the Metropolitan Police. But I think the problem perhaps I'm getting to here is that it's not just something that resides in the Metropolitan Police. It resides in virtually all institutions, including education, including Nottingham Trent University. And it's those things that we have to address. And the evidence is clear that the experience of staff from marginalised groups and students is not as good as the people who are white. And so we have to accept that we have these issues within this organisation in the way that the Metropolitan Police did. Following that, a series of other atrocities in this country and elsewhere leads to the rise of other pressure groups like Black Lives Matter and moves things on. Elsewhere, in 1991, Section 28 was still on the statute book, and Section 28 made it illegal for teachers to, in the terms of the law, promote homosexuality in schools. This is an amazing piece of legislation. It's actually still exists in many countries, some even in Europe. It was repealed in 2000, but it just gives a sense of where things were in 1991 and perhaps still what there is to do now. And also in the intervening years, there's been a much stronger awareness of the abuse that children have experienced, sexual abuse that children have experienced, sometimes in institutions. In this case, it's a picture of the Cedars Children's Home, which was part of one of the many scandals in Nottinghamshire around that. Subsequent to that, of course, the university has made a contribution here, and Bin's work setting up, and the colleagues' work setting up the Safer Living Foundation and the Corbett Centre. So there's all sorts of things happening, and you can see all kinds of movement. But I wonder really how far we've got with this. And I think when I look back, I think I was aware of a lot of these issues, but I think I tolerated more. And I think that is the thing, that we're aware of these issues, but it's how much we're prepared to tolerate. And that's perhaps what we need to challenge now. I look back now and say 1991, goodness, did we tolerate that? Did I tolerate that? I wonder how much in 30 years you look back at now and then think, crumbs. Because in 30 years you'll still say, crumbs. Why did we tolerate that? So to help us have a look at this, I had a look at the recently published Nottingham Trent University Gender and Ethnicity Pay Gap Report. Now, I know this is not everyone might have read this, so I've read it for you. And I mean, there's good and bad in this, I have to say. And I'm going to put up a quote from the Vice Chancellor. I don't know who's on this call, but don't judge me for this. It's but really, I quite like him. I think he's been a good Vice Chancellor here, and he's done a lot of really great stuff. I do take issue with the relentless positive messaging for everything, and I think sometimes you have to accept things aren't quite right. I kind of feel here, if a tidal wave came through Nottingham tonight, NTU News tomorrow would say something like, great news, Newton building washed clean last night, get your pictures of it today. And sometimes you have to accept that things aren't right. Anyway, so he takes heart from the report, and I'm not going to take heart from it. And he says, while important work remains to be done, our trajectory is a positive one. I'm not sure that's enough to have a good trajectory. You've got to have a think, where actually are we? So we still have, there's a lot of talk in the report about the difference between means and medians. Clearly, medians give a better story for the university, and hence you can get a kind of stats 101 thing on means and medians, if you like, while reading it. But let's stay with the means. There is still a substantial pay gap between men and women at this university. It might be moving slightly in the right direction, but really, is that sufficient? Can we actually tolerate these things? And the mean bonus gap is this, is that of the men that get bonuses in the university, then their bonuses are 20% higher than the women who get bonuses. And I suppose maybe there's a trajectory. Maybe it's not as bad as it was. Maybe we're better than De Montfort University, others in the sector. But is that sufficient to say, yeah, we're not as bad as them, and it's getting slightly better, but it's still not that good? And so I kind of think in 2021, when 100 years after the suffragettes, 60 years after the women's movement, there's all kinds of people writing and doing stuff. Outrageous plug for my niece's excellent book. I'm not sure we should actually be accepting this. And we can reflect back and say, yes, we've moved, but how far? Is it enough? And I seriously wonder. And also in 2020, and me a culprit on this, I'm not sure why I've not made a bigger fuss about this, because I think language is very important, and it defines the world we live in. I see, I'm a fellow of the British Psychological Society, which is fine because I'm a fellow, but every member of staff that joins us is contractually obliged to become a fellow of the ATA. We contractually oblige our female colleagues to become fellows, and our students, we award all our level, we make all our level 7 students a Master of Science or Arts. And of the 700 psychology students who've been given an undergraduate degree this year, there'll be about 550 young women who are now a Bachelor of Arts, or Science, Bachelor of Arts or Science. It seems to me really quite strange why we're not kicking back on this. And I think our tolerance for language here is one of those things that we'll look back to this time and say, really, why do we still allow that then? Anyway, okay. So I've drifted off the gender and ethnicity pay gap report, and I'm sure many of you would like me to return to that. So I'll give you some more highlights from that if we get to the ethnicity part. Well, you're not going to be surprised at what the data is here, is that there is a gap between the pay people from minority groups as opposed to the pay to white people. So it's not a big surprise. In the narrative of the university, it's getting better, but it's there. And for the bonuses, then the percentage of white staff getting a bonus is just about 25th. And of people from the marginalised groups, 10%. So again, I mean, why do we accept this? It seems to me that there are issues around how we might deal with racism here. And it's not for me to it's certainly not for me to come up with all the answers for this. There are certain things that we can do. Oh, I've forgotten to put this in. When I joined the university, we did various things. So I was involved actually with the FE College in putting on courses on Black psychology. And when I came here, I continued that. And this sounds like virtue signalling on my part, but au contraire, because that didn't continue. And for various reasons. And when we started the psychology degree, we had a final year module called Black Psychology. And I think we thought we were sort of moving things on, but we didn't. And that sort of stopped after 4 or 5 years. And it's only 3 or 4 years ago now that we've got back to having that kind of content within the psychology degree. And that's quite shocking, really, I think. And that's certainly against myself, is to not push hard enough on these things. Well, some of the things we can do is to diversify the curriculum, obviously. Though, if I reflect back, it makes me think, well, why do I even have to think about this? Why isn't this just happening as a matter of course in the stuff that I do? We talk a lot about achievement and progression gaps. It's part of the university's KPIs for us that we change these. But what does this mean, an achievement gap? Really, what we're saying is that people from certain groups, from marginalised groups, get lower scores in certain areas. Why is this? Is this really an achievement gap? This pathologises the student, doesn't it? Really, the gap is ours. The gap is ours that we're not providing the right education or the right assessments that allow people to show what they know, understand and can do. And it's not an achievement gap, it's an ignorance gap on our part, and perhaps we should frame it in those ways as we go forward. One of the things that we found looking at psychology data that one of my colleagues, Sally Andrews, did for us is just a brilliant piece of work, breaking down the data we get around these achievement gaps by module. And we know that some modules don't have this difference in scores between groups and some do. And you can frame this in all sorts of ways, but to me, the honest framing is to say that you've got some modules and some assessments that are actually discriminatory. And it's that to address, and perhaps to address our language accordingly. Okay. The university is hoping to decolonise. I think this is a very difficult thing to do. I don't think it's fully grasped what this will entail, but there can be work and we try and understand these issues so we can move towards it. But I think there's an underlying problem for us here, and I think I've thought it since that event 30 years ago when we had a gender awareness thing, that it's actually very difficult to get traction on any of these issues in a school of social science. It's hard enough in a university, but in a school of social science, almost impossible. And the reason is because of the way we frame these debates. And I mean, we're the good guys. Many of us read The Guardian. It's got to be all right, hasn't it? The bad guys, the racists, the sexists, they're over there. We're a department of social science. We read about these things, we talk about things, we talk about these things to our students. But in so doing, in creating this digital divide between racists and non-racists and putting ourselves where we are, it makes it harder then to actually address some of the things I've sort of pointed to here. And so I think it's very hard for us as an organisation to do this. And I think, but have to crack on and do it, I think. Anyway, so in the University Reimagined, the school is, I think, genuinely thinking about this, very genuinely thinking about this. And again, one of our game changers is to pursue decolonisation. And secondly, because these two things aren't necessarily connected, be known for the diversity and inclusion of our staff, students and curriculum. So, two things. And I think this is very positive. I think that the university can look forward, the school can look forward to do this, but it has to acknowledge, I think, that the difficulties in doing it and the journey it's got to go on to get there. Teaching and learning. So I turned up for Hughes biscuits. I think I did try them once or twice. Teaching was very different then. This was the height of technology. This is a bander machine. This is how we used to get reprographics. And yes, people did used to wear cardigans like that in 1991. And the way we communicated was through pigeonholes. Now, I know we still have pigeonholes now, but there's not much goes in them. The pigeonhole was the only method of communication. So if you've been naughty or something and the head of department wanted to see you, you get a note in the pigeonhole saying, head of department wants to see you. But you only get that note when you walked in there, and you obviously weren't checking it. It wasn't pinging up on your screen. And then there are all sorts of devices. If you really didn't want to get that message, you could relocate it in one of the other pigeonholes and then pretend that it's been incorrectly put in the first place. I mean, you could prevaricate for days, weeks like this. Message. If you actually want to make a better work-life environment, get rid of email and just have pigeonholes again. It just slows things down brilliantly. And the other thing we had in 1991, which was the height of technology, was the overhead projector. Oh my God, we loved our overhead projectors and getting the acetates right. And we had one of the technician tasks was, the most important one was to make sure the bulbs worked, in that, to have spare bulbs at the crucial time when a bulb would blow or something like that. Things have moved on a lot in teaching and learning, quite remarkably. In the introduction, Sarah mentioned Jean Underwood. Jean Underwood was our professor of psychology, very successful getting grants in, particularly from Bechter. And the first grant that I was involved in, Bechter, it was a $250,000 grant, and the question was, is there any educational value in rolling out broadband to all schools? And according to Bechter, the government, Gordon Brown, who was Chancellor of the Exchequer at the time, was waiting on the answer of this to roll out broadband to all schools in the country. the ambition was to give all schools 2 megabits download. When currently now, if my download drops to 2 megabits, I'm on the phone to Virgin Media. So what are you doing? So this was going to go into a whole secondary school. They'd have a download of 2 megabits. That's how much things have moved on in that time. And with that changing technology, we also have a different people that we're dealing with. Our students coming through now are what, for want of a better phrase, are digital natives. You see 2-year-olds, they're on laptops, they're swiping the phones. I watched my nephew the other day, he's 12. He made a video, he edited a video, he had lots of little clips put in it. He put a soundtrack on it, he put a voiceover, he had a start and a finish to it, and he did all that on his phone in about half an hour. And it's just amazing. And that kind of awareness of it. And so coming to the university, when I went to university, they had all sorts of special toys and tools and things. It was an exciting place to go technically. Now it's not. People are actually often quite downgrading their kit to come and use the stuff they have at the university. And learning and teaching just changes a lot. I mean, for younger viewers on this call, the picture on the left, the picture on the left is a library. Yes, it's a library. It's a place where you go, where you have books and you get information. I mean, why would you consider for a moment having a library now when you've got your laptop? If you explain to people how you use the library, going through the card index, finding the numbers, finding the shelves, going and getting the shelves, looking for the book, finding it's not in the right place, you know, why would you do that? I mean, this technology has just moved on so much. One of the things I think that we're stuck on here, and it's worth reflecting on, is what we do with assessments. Assessments, the format for assessments goes back a long way. In 1861, a group of academics from Cambridge was invited to go up to Durham to set up some examinations. And so they went up to Durham schools and they looked at what people were doing in the schools, how they were learning, and then they set up assessments that matched how they were learning, which is the obvious way that you would assess people. So they set up examinations, which eventually became A-levels, GCSEs and A-levels, and they formed the format for our examination systems now. And that doesn't make any sense now, does it? If you look at how we learn now, then and particularly the changes in the last 30 years, then we learn like this. We don't sit down and write something for a long period of time just off. Why would we ever get people to do an examination? Why would we get people to sit down and write for 3 hours with a pen? It's just ridiculous. They will never do that. They have not done that before, except when they've done an examination. They will never do that again. Any examination that takes people, assessment, takes people into exam room and asks them to do that is just crazy. It just shouldn't be there. And I wonder also about the form of the essay, whether we should actually be setting people to do things in that particular format. So I kind of think there's a whole range of things here that we need to consider, and consider what it is that people learn now and what we should assess. And I know one of the things with this workshops and celebrations this week, people have got a whole range of really interesting innovations that they're doing around teaching and learning and practice. It's just fantastic. But the default is still to go back to an examination and an essay. And I wonder whether that should be something you think about as you go forwards. So when it comes to the University Reimagined, actually the school doesn't have one of its game changers around teaching and learning. So make up your own. mine would be to abolish examination. We will abolish examinations. We will abolish the formal essay. Things like that. Reimagine it, rechange it. So, and I think, as a passing thought on this, is that the current lockdown and the pandemic has been really cathartic for change here. It's forced us online, but actually forced us to re-evaluate the way that we do a lot of our teaching and learning. And I think coming out of this, it's an opportunity to reset the whole thing and to make assessments and learning that's appropriate for what students need, how students think, how students engage with technology, and prepare them for what they get when they leave the university. So, coming to the end of this. So, what do we know at the end of this? Well, we know there's a number of narratives for Nottingham, and that it's a city of rebellion and resistance, that the university has been here for a long time. It's stood here as part of the city and can engage with it in that way. We know that libraries are a thing of the past, and technology has moved on. No more so than the internet revolutionizing our lives. The way we teach now, and I use this picture because it contains one of my colleagues, Mark Torrance, and he appears, as I understand it, in every brochure that the university produces around psychology, so I thought I'd better put him in. That the university now can stand for something in Nottingham and provide a focal point for the city. And if you actually do want the authentic voice of Nottingham, then you can do no worse than to tune in to the Sleaford Mods, I think Nottingham's finest. So that's me. That's all. Thank you very much.
That's great, Phil. Are you happy to take some questions?
Oh yeah, if there are questions, I'm happy to take.
Questions or comments?
Hang on, I'll just get rid of me picture. Okay, questions or comments either, yeah.
Okay. Has anybody got any a comment or a question for Phil? Matthew.
Very, very informative. Was really touched when you talked about the disparities between gender, between also race. And I wonder whether you also note that meanwhile people have actually recognized the differences in how people are treated or where there are gender pay gaps. There hasn't been any substantial work as to how these things manifest. So people talk about racism. The development of racism has actually changed since post-colonial era to today. So there hasn't been much investment in how these things are played while people are just talking about racism. And probably when they come now to say what are the manifestations of racism, then they are looking at the olden days racism, which has now been surpassed by events due to how people interact and how people see things changing. How do you take?
No, I agree with you. I think one of the striking things of liberal institutions like the university is that we put to one side the kind of very vulgar forms of racism, if you like, but we just clean them up and continue with them. And so we're more civilized about it, but I think the same issues are there. And I think that's something that I think I have to address as a person, but I think also the university, the school has to address as to how those things still operate. No, I agree with you. I agree with you. And I think it's a lot of work needs to be done while people think through that. I think the evidence is there that there are discriminatory practices, but to figure out how they're operating, I think is quite hard, but that needs to be sorted.
Oh, thank you.
Brilliant. Okay, I think that's all. I think, Phil, when you get a chance, there are some fantastic comments and some very engaging stuff in the chat, which is incredibly helpful. So I would just like to say thank you very much. That was really thought-provoking. It was great for us who weren't around at NTU at that time to see all those reflections about the university and what it was like. That was absolutely tremendous, and some real challenges for us, I think, as we go forward. So thank you very much indeed, Phil. We'll enjoy you remaining with us as an emeritus professor, and I think that would be absolutely fantastic. So thank you all for coming. I hope you really enjoyed it and enjoyed the rest of the showcase. And thank you, Phil, for setting us up for a great week.
Thanks.
All right.
Bye.
Okay.